All right, I'm doing it. You made me do it. Finally, it's happening. You guys have wanted a tier list for so long. All right, I've done my best to say, play what you want to play. Play the coolest spec that you think exists. Play the funnest spec that you think exists. Play what you like. None of it's good enough for y'all. Today, we are going to be actually doing an honest to goodness tier list. This is going to be based on PvP, generally speaking, for damage and utility. Utility being things like interrupts, self-heal, hard CCs, soft CCs, etc. I also do not claim to be an expert at all classes, right? I will probably miss something because I'm human and I will hear about it in the comments, I'm sure of it. I'm not going to be reviewing tanks, they're on the board already. The only one that I could see having a little bit of worth would be Prot Paladin and maybe Guardian Druid. That's about it. Everything else, it doesn't really hold a candle to any DPS spec, okay? With that out of the way, we're gonna start with the best class in the game, Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior, first up, right? What else can be said about it? Sudden death. It's a win condition. Is RNG as the spec can actually be because you are almost searching for sudden death procs. The class does have a very high burst. It's got some decent utility. It's got, you know, a pummel. It's got a slow as long as you're in melee range. You can disarm. There's some war banner. So, you know, you can help your teammates out a little bit there. So I am going to put this in the high damage and mech utility. And then on to Fury. Fury has basically the same toolkit as far as damage and utility goes. They don't have any more utility than Arms Warriors do. The only thing that kind of gives them, I think, a little bit more utility, and it's only really utility in the self-sustain category, is the self-healing from Bloodlust, Ignore Pain, and having a second Crusader proc. The only time you'll get a second Crusader proc if you're arms is if you're weapon swapping, and usually if you're weapon swapping, you're already playing at a higher caliber than the general person anyway, so I'm kind of gonna give that one to you. All right, if you're weapon swapping as arms, you're doing a good job, and you probably know more about it than I do. Next up, we're gonna go with Affliction. Affliction has hard CC, right? They've got a fear, they've got a range slow that is spammable, good pressure, but I wouldn't say it has insane burst potential. It does have, that's a lie. It definitely does have insane burst potential because when you build up those agony stacks, you can definitely get a very large burst off of life drain if you don't get interrupted. Then of course you can wall and then life drain for that persistent burst. Now you can still get stunned through it, so it's not an I win button, but I would say your UA is huge. It keeps your target from being dispelled, right? Because if you dispel that target, then your healer gets locked out and takes a shitload of damage. So you can keep that target slowed and with a UA on it, and they're kind of not going to move anywhere. It's going to be, you can control that target until they, you know, get close to you. Arcane Mage. These aren't in any order, by the way. They were literally just in the order that they were displayed to me. So that's why I just went from Warrior to Warlock to Mage. Mages have, at least Arcane, is very high damage, very, very high utility. Between Time Warp, having a sheep, having a counter spell, and just extremely high damage with every arcane spell that you have, everything hits hard with this spec. And you've got Blink, right? So you've got really good mobility. And like he said, if you time your Time Warps correctly, you can kind of get away from almost everybody, right? If you juke them the right way and then use a Blink right after. But that one is definitely staying in the highest tier category because of obvious reasons. Assassination Rogue, in my experience, plays really well with high haste. Now, that's not saying it's the only way to build the Rogue. High haste allows for a lot of auto attacks. It scales really well with elemental force. It allows for your energy regen to happen extremely quickly. Those things make high haste assassination makes Rogue very fun to play. The damage can be good. You're basically fishing for ambush proc, so the more hits you get off on a target, the more chances of getting an ambush proc, at least if you play that certain talent. And the utility on Rogue is obviously pretty crazy too. You've got a kick, sap, cheap shot, kidney, a pretty solid toolkit. You've actually got a self heal. You don't really have a whole lot of defensive cooldowns as a Rogue, so I'm gonna put this Rogue, I'm actually gonna put Rogue in general all three specs I'm going to put in the same category. High utility and mat damage, because it really, in my experience, because I have an outlaw and an assassination rogue, it really depends on how you build them. The utility across the board for rogue is pretty standard. I think everybody has a movement ability. If it's not shadow step, it's the hook shot. So I'm gonna put those guys right there. Balance druid. All right, this is gonna be a fun one because I've seen some star surges come out from people that really hurt. But I can't say that druids have a whole lot of utility either. Their healing, their off healing, if anything, would be the high utility there. So to be completely honest, I think I'm gonna have to put this one in the high utility and mat damage category. Right, I don't know a whole lot about druids, but from what I've seen, I think they kind of belong in that mid tier. Demo Warlock. This is another class that it kind of depends on how you build. It also depends on some of the specs, some of the talents that you take. But for the most part, it has a ranged stun, right? The pet just has to do it. It has a ranged kick from your Fellstalkers that you can call. That's a PvP talent. You also got fear, and you've also got some huge damage cooldowns from your pet. So I am actually going to put this. The only reason I don't want to put it at the same tier as Mage is because, or as Arcane Mage, is because Arcane Mage has so much in terms of defensives, or like, this is a tough one for me. This is a really tough one. I think I'm going to have to put it up here just because of the amount. You've got the kick, you've got the stun, you've also got your fear, and you've also got some high damage. So I think that's enough to say, oh, and you've got your slow, right? You've also got your range slow. All right, that is definitely going to stay in the top tier for me. Destro Warlock. This is a tough one. This is a tough one because this kind of suffers from the right place, right time mentality if the team has any interrupts left. If the other team has any interrupts left. You've still got your slow, you've still got a fear as a warlock. You've got a pet slow as well if you're running succubus. That's basically it that I can remember off the top of my head. However, if you land a soulfire and or multiple chaos bolts, sometimes it doesn't take multiple chaos bolts, you can possibly one-shot somebody. I think that's enough said. The utility isn't quite the same as Demo Warlock, and I will say that Destro is a lot more fun in BGs than in arenas, and Demo is a lot more fun in arenas, and that's coming from my personal experience. But I'm also not very good at casters, so that's probably why I prefer Demo, because my pet kind of does everything and I kind of just CC things on the side. But that's also a playstyle choice, right? So I'm actually going to put this in the same category as Affliction, high damage and meh utility. All right, on to Disc Priest. Obviously, Disc Priest's healing spec, it doesn't have high damage. Well, it has some damage, but it obviously has very high utility. This one is, I know it feels really weird putting it next to Boomy, but because I'm realizing this now halfway through the video, that I only put on here utility and damage. I didn't put on damage and healing. You know what? I'm going to consider damage also as healing, unless you're a hybrid class. Does that make sense? If you're a hybrid class, it's technically going to be considered utility. So, as a Disc Priest, the utility you have, what, is a fear as far as hard CC goes. So you've got your AoE fear and you've got to commit to a spot with that, right? But you've also have extremely good healing, right? So I think that deserves a high damage and meh utility, in my opinion. Elemental Shaman. All right, this class is fun to play. I think it's got pretty good utility if you spec for it. Counter-Strike Totem, which is just a damage reflect. You've also got the punt, right, which allows you to kick somebody off a ledge or just to gain distance from you. And then you've got Spammable Frost Shock, which is a slow and some pretty high damage, honestly. That being said, you also have a slow totem, Ghost Wolf, a ranged kick with Wind Shear. So I'm honestly going to put this one in the high utility and met damage. And I think that is a very good place for it. Enhancement Shaman. I'm sure that I am extremely biased by this. So the problem with that Shaman suffers from in general is the lack of defensive cooldowns, in my opinion. Your defensive cooldown, the only one you really have is like the knockback or Counter-Strike Totem. And Counter-Strike Totem doesn't mitigate any damage incoming, right? You still take all of the damage, but it just gets reflected. So it still feels like a very squishy spec. I even regemmed my shaman to have quite a bit of health, and it still feels pretty squishy even in BGs and in arenas. So they do a lot of damage when you're able to get healed. I think I've got to put this one. It feels weird putting this in the same tier as Arms Warrior, but it's like a slot machine, right? Sometimes it does an insane amount of damage. It does more damage than Ellie in my opinion, and I think the utility is less because you've only really got 3 heals and you don't have a spammable slow. You only have the Frost Shock, which is on a cooldown, right? So I think that is a fair trade-off for the enhancement shaman. Feral Druid. This is another really tough one because Feral Druid in my brain is a bite machine. Got roots, you've got some off healing, but basically from my understanding, because I haven't played a feral, right? I don't really know a lot about the PvP aspect of the class. But from what I do know, you're basically building up your combo points in order to get a big bite off. That's why you basically build Harmo, crit, high attack power, etc. You basically build glass cannon from my understanding. I've got to put it up with enhancement shaman. I've just got to. I think that means I have to bump up disc. Just because the high output of the healing, the output of the healing is just so insane. And the fact that you have two, no, you know what? It does have utility because you've got the 2 schools. I'm right. Okay, disc belongs up there. I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. I know you're screaming at me like it's not on par with Arms Warrior. It's not even in the same class, especially with enhance. Fuck. Yeah, so I would say I'm stuck with Feral, right? I don't know if it should be here or here. For the time being, I'm gonna say it's here, even though it doesn't really have that high of utility. You can still off heal, you can still root, and the damage overall is meh, right? Except until you build up those bites, which is kind of the same, I think, for Boomy with Star Surges. So I think that's a fair comparison. Fire, I've only heard about it as a meme. I think it has to go here. I don't think it has the correct toolkit that it needs at our level to be competitive. So Frost Mage, I've seen Frost do some pretty big damage, and I think the utility is just as good. So I think I'm actually gonna put that up there as well, because Frost still pumps damage, and it's not as high of damage as, let's say, Arcane, but it still does a lot. Frost DK. Not until lately have a bunch of Frost DKs been coming out of the woodwork. From what I've seen in arenas, Frost pumps. Their slow is a pain to deal with on anything that's a melee or ranged, because you can't get away from them. They've got an interrupt grip, anti-magic shell. I think this hovers, I think it's the same thing where it kind of hovers between the two. I know people sleep on DKs for the most part, but I think it goes next to enhance, because I've seen some Frost output some insane damage. Demon Hunters, they have a burst window metamorphosis. You basically have up until that point to kill somebody, and if you don't kill somebody by that point, you probably have lost. That being said, the damage output during that window is pretty high. I don't know how much utility they have. I know they kind of have that, I think it's an AoE stun, and I believe they have an interrupt as well. I think I've kind of got to put them at the same tier as DH. I think that belongs there. All right, Holy Priest. Since the last buffs, this is the easiest one on the whole damn thing. I'm actually going to count healers' damage as their utility. Holy Priest is top tier right now. Most priest specs are. Holy Paladin, same thing. I believe it belongs in the top tier. Actually, their healing output, especially after the buffs that they've gotten recently, is going to be very high. And for the most part, I feel like their utility they've kind of got Hodge and they've kind of got Pony, right? It's really all they've got. And they've got Bubble. So that, as far as utility goes, I think it kind of belongs in that second tier. Mistweaver, I would kind of say, is in the same boat where their output is insanely high for healing, but the way that their dispel works, at least to me, is clunky. I don't really understand it, and I haven't looked into it. So I know their healing output is extremely high. I'm gonna put them in that same tier. Resto Druid, I think has the mehist of the healers, and I think it has the highest utility of the healers just because you can shift and everything else. I think that one has got to go in the lower tier of the healers. Resto Shaman. I'm putting it in the very top only because Resto Shaman has a pretty decent amount of damage output. It also has a spammable slow with Frost Shock, slowing totem, counter strike totem, knockback, Ghost Wolf, your ranged kick. That's a lot of fucking utility right there, boys. Resto Shaman's healing output also is insanely high. That belongs in the highest tier for sure. Ret Paladin. There's a lot to be said about Ret Paladin. It is very high on the list. It has a bit of a crutch that people don't really talk about. Baron Rivendare's sword, as well as having 10% movement speed, and any class that can use a two-hander in this list can also use that 10% movement speed. That also works in arenas. Ret Paladins benefit the most from the healing that is on that sword, and it is a pretty big crutch, I think, when it comes to sustain. Now, to say that they don't have high damage without it, I think would be a misnomer, and the fact that their off healing is actually pretty insane, I think it belongs in this tier. Actually, that's not in the same tier as Shaman. It's not in the same tier as any of these guys. I think it actually belongs in the A tier. That one is probably going to be, I think that one's going to be the most controversial. Shadow Priest, also very, very easy top tier for me. Between being able to toss bubbles and stuff on your allies, you know, the absorb bubbles. They can also off heal with Shadow Mend, just got insane damage output, fear with your Psy Fiend. There's a lot going for it, right? So that's what I mean when I put it that high. Unholy DK. Unholy DK has a lot of burst in arenas. I haven't really seen one perform as well as I'd like to in BGs. I do plan to make one soon. I think I have to put it on par with the other DH in this list. And you guys have seen if you guys have seen my last stream, I just finished gearing my Windwalker. There's going to be a video about how I built my Windwalker coming out very soon. And this I've got to still, I think, this is the same, I think, as Ret Paladin. It kind of hovers between the two, but I've got to put it here just because I think if it had higher energy regen and you were able to spam your buttons way more, I think it would be a little bit higher. And if it were maybe a little heavier armor, I could see it going a little higher on the list. But the fact that you wear leather, you have to stack quite a bit of stam, and you have to stack quite a bit of versatility, not only for offensive reasons, but for also defensive reasons. I think it belongs in that second tier there. Well, there you have it, guys. You asked for a tier list, and you have received a tier list. Now, you're probably going to disagree with me on a lot of these things. This actually might be a decently accurate tier list. I'm curious, guys. Obviously, those disgruntled and in disagreements with me are going to leave a comment down below. Even if you agree with me, leave a comment down below. Let's show those naysayers that I kind of know what I'm talking about. Alright guys, as always, I want to thank you for watching. I always appreciate your views and I appreciate your sense of community. I want to give a shout out to my members of the channel. Brand new as of yesterday, I know it says 0 days ago, but it was less than 24 hours ago. Thundersocks, LC Gaming, Whose Depths, Bob, Zigtal, Evan Campbell, Stop, Drad, Crumb, Jacob Jess, Persuasions, Dennis McPeak, and Poutine Master, aka Waza. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. It means so much that you do. Like I said, it's good enough for me if you guys just hang out and watch the videos, let alone clicking that button that's like right down there. Not the subscribe one, the one next to it that says join. That's how you get your name shouted out on this list, and also get the cool little chat badge when I go live. And you can join at any time. You don't have to wait for me to stream, because everybody knows I don't have a schedule. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time. Peace.